I'm going to introduce my CLIL unit on neologisms and nonsense poetry. And as you can see in this mind map, we work on the four C's related to CLIL that are culture, cognition, communication, and content. When it comes to culture, students are going to learn about English poetry. They're going to learn about language creativity and the faculty of language. They're going to learn about neologisms and about Shakespeare and Carroll and their importance in amplifying the English lexicon. When it comes to cognition, students are going to work on this complex concepts, such as they're going to understand human language and how neologisms work. They're going to learn about vocabulary building and morphology in English, and they're going to practice their inquiry thinking by means of inquiry questions and also by wondering about the meaning of the neologisms in the poem. Related to content, students are going to work on creative writing, they're going to work on nonsense poetry and figures of speech. They're going to understand and work on what is language cognition, especially related to neologisms, and that's when Carroll and Shakespeare are very, very relevant, and especially through the poem The Jabberwocky. When it comes to communication, students are going to work on some language. They're going to use some language of learning. They're going to use key vocabulary related to poetry. They're going to use the past tense to talk about what the author thought, what the author intended. And they're going to use the present tense when they speak about their own poem and their own neologisms. When it comes to language for learning, they're going to ask questions. They're going to use prompts to classify, to express their opinion, to agree and disagree. And finally, about language through learning, they're going to use the feedback from their peers. They're going to make a glossary of new words they've learned. They're going to discuss and they're going to integrate comments from the students. These sessions are also organized in 3 periods of 15 minutes each, and these are the different aims. They are related to the IB. There, I also talk about the teaching objectives, and I put them in relation to the learning outcomes when it comes to content, when it comes to cognition. This is very specific here. And when it comes to communication as well, I speak about specific vocabulary, about the grammar. They're going to use prompts. These are different prompts they're going to use in the language for learning and the different processes they're going to use in their language through learning. Culture is also very important. They're going to understand a lot about the English literature and how English implemented so many new words. These are the materials and resources we're going to use, and I would like to explain them to you. So we're going to use a photocopy of the poem. We're going to use the computer, the projector, and the digital boards. We're going to use the worksheets and pens. We're going to use some articles we're going to read in an open class to talk about Shakespeare's neologisms. We're going to use the Kahoots. Basically, it's a playful way for them to see some of the neologisms and to realize the first one is a little bit related to Shakespeare, and the second one is more related to neologisms nowadays, like, for example, FOMO or head fart and other things that students might say or might know, but they never realize they're actually new words that are actually very, very young. Then we're going to watch a video of the Jabberwocky that's integrated in the Prezi that I am also going to show you. So the idea is also to work on intonation and how intonation is so relevant for the meaning of a poem. It adds layers of meaning. Then we're going to clarify the poem and some of the neologisms in the poem. That's also in the Prezi. We'll do the video presentation, especially that's very useful if somebody wants to teach these classes, and the mind map that I already presented. Another resource that is very, very important is a motivated teacher, someone that finds this unit as important as I see it, because it's really important that students own the language, students take risks and chances to create new words, that they don't feel chained to the words that already exist, because language is alive and it's changing every day. New words are created every day. And that's the whole point. Also, in relation to poetry, to be able to forget about how poetry can be such a difficult genre, and actually it can be something that anybody could do. And many times in our real life, we're also doing poetry. In this beautiful website, we can see an official uh, transcription of the Jabberwocky, the poem. It's the original transcription. This is also an illustration by Lewis Carroll. And this is a poem I'm going to photocopy and print for the students so that they also have a hard copy of the poem. And it's very interesting as well. In this website, I've also based some of the analysis of the poem, and we can see, this is something we're going to comment in our class, we can see some of the meaning of the different neologisms, like slithy is composed of slimy and lithe, which means smooth and active. So it's all those different new words that actually describe this situation in the Jabberwocky, this idyllic situation of peace before the monster comes. See, this is one of the materials I'm going to use. This is one of the websites I'm going to use it as well at the beginning. After having worked on the inquiry questions and having warmed up a little bit on the first session, we're also going to talk about how Shakespeare was so relevant for the English language. And here it's a website. It's also reliable. So it's specialized in Shakespeare. And it explains how the incredible amount of words he created. And it's just so interesting. I think it's a very good example for students to see actually how Shakespeare, or maybe many other people, they just create a new word that eventually is part of the English language and it becomes a daily word. Like, for example, indignity. Or overpriced. These are normal words. Disproportioned. These are normal words in the English language, and we would never have guessed that it actually was created only 500 years ago. So this is something that with this, I am hoping that students will feel a little bit more, they will take a risk and create new words for their poems and understand that actually, if there isn't a word that describes a concept, maybe they can be playful with language and mix two words and create a new word for that, even if it's only for that situation, that moment. This is a very interesting blog as well that I'm planning to use to read in open class and comment and discuss, where it talks about how many inventors are famous, like scientists, like Thomas Edison, like Steve Jobs. They are famous because they invented things, but Shakespeare invented words, and not many people know that. So in here, it speaks about the rough amount of words, 1700s, but it's a rough amount. So there's not a consensus on how many words Shakespeare invented. And we also have that in the Spanish language with Quevedo, for example. So the fact that new words appear every day, the fact that 1700 words of the English language were created by Shakespeare is something that students should bear in mind. And ultimately, it will take them to learn about English culture, English literature, and the faculty of language, the language creativity. I also like this blog as well very much because it relates to puts together Lewis Carroll and Shakespeare. And I think that's the best way to introduce. And it also tells the students different types of strategies to create new words. For example, conjoining two words, or changing verbs into adjectives, or changing nouns into verbs, or adding prefixes to words, adding suffixes. And that's what I want them to do. Indirectly, students are gonna learn about English morphology as well. This is one of the Cahoots. This is the more historical one that talks about neologisms. So I think it's a good way to finish the first lesson, to just have a game. And also, it's a little bit of competition. And I think it's going to give them the chance to put into practice everything they've learned and everything they've discussed. And it talks about Shakespeare, it talks about Dr. Seuss, it talks about what neologisms are. It gives them the chance to prove themselves. This is the second Kahoot I'm planning on using. And this is very interesting as well because it talks about things that are actually part of our daily language, like the girl next door or hench, or there's some very, very funny ones like wicket or FOMO, or ruffle or brain fart or hungry, like hungry and angry at the same time. So I am 100% sure they've heard this in social media, TikTok, YouTube, and I think they're gonna actually connect many things after playing this Kahoot, and they're gonna see way more clearly what neologisms are and how often and how easily sometimes they just end up being part of the lexicon, even if it's in a colloquial way. In the second lesson, after warming up, I'm gonna present the Prezi about the Jabberwocky, and this is a very complex material. So it starts with stating that English is alive and also calling to all the other things we've done. And this is a presentation of the poem. We're going to read it in class aloud, and we're going to talk about how intonation changes the meaning of a poem. And in here, we're going to do a very detailed explanation of the neologisms. So in here, after the students have tried to come up with an explanation for the creation of these words, I'm going to go over the most important ones to link words and meaning. And I'm going to talk about like brightlig, which is brilliant and also very bright, to talk about the sun. I'm going to talk about all these words here. And I'm going to just tell the students how these words are mixing parts of the beginning of a word and the ending of another word to create a mixed concept. This is the most important one. Like frumious is furious and raging at the same time, and that's what the Jabberwocky is. And I am hoping by showing the students this that they will understand how parts of words together they mix the concept if the concept is close enough, and that depends as well on the subjective opinion of the author, but also how sounds are very relevant to make a word sound like aggressive, and then we are transferring some knowledge, some meaning. A frumious definitely doesn't sound nice. So all these things are going to help them create their own neologisms, and be more specific about the meaning. After talking about the neologisms, I'm going to talk about in a deeper way about intonation. And I'm going to present two different ways of reading the Jabberwocky. One of them is a classic by Benedict Cumberbatch.
Mimsy with the borough grooves and the mole rats looked great.
As you can see, is a serious, very professional, excellent intonation reciting the poem, but it's also maybe in a way is well, it's not playful as the next one is. So I think it's the right intonation, but it depends on what you want to create, the effect you want to create in the audience, and that's why the next one, the more playful one, can be aimed at creating, and as good as the first one, but aiming at creating a more distended atmosphere, just being a bit more playful.